when I was when I made my second album, I approached a guy in Pensacola. He was just like Holiday Inn drummer, and I gave him my album and said, you know, would you be interested in playing in my band? And he said, oh, I don't know. And then he called me on the phone. He said, hey, I like this album. Man, a lot of people get killed on it. So he wasn't familiar. He was very impressed with the death toll on the first album. I just, you know, basically I was killing surrogate forms of myself. And when I first started, I think that was a legitimate thing to do because I was suicidal and, you know, clinically depressed. And slowly but surely, as I've just been enveloped in kindness and generosity and warmth and you know, embraced by, you know, everyone from the media to, you know, people on the street, it's real hard to feel like you don't belong here. You know, 12 years ago when I started this, I was, you know, sitting at the edge of the world thinking I should go. And right now, I can't imagine leaving because I have a family, I have 2 kids. It's been quite an odyssey back from, like I say, the edge of the world. How did we get on that subject?
But the men could not be sure if he was talking to them or talking. This song I wrote for the last album. It's called Drill a Hole in That Substrate and Tell Me What You See. It's very directly titled, Drill a Hole in Your Substrate and Tell Me What You See. And I thought it would create world peace. I'm puzzled. Kind of did the math and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That song had all the right qualities to create world peace. But I guess if John Lennon can't do it with Imagine, I can't do it with If Jesus Drove a Motorhome.
How do you find that your either professional or personal or both relationship with David Byrne folded into all of that? I mean,
Oh, what a complicated story that is. Because we had a history long before he and I met. I had come up with this theory called super white, and the basic principle of super white was that if you were like trapped in your whiteness and you wanted to get out of it, like you were too white, you know, like you were too like that, and you wanted to get out of it, like most white people that want to get out of that, like they try to dress hip and they do things like that and they just get more pathetically white. So I decided that I was going to try to act more pathetically white so that if I was able to transcend white, it would be like a function of grace. Like I would go so far into white, like I would become so pathetically white that I would accidentally fall into soul, basically. You know, because it's closer, like like if soul's there and you have to go this way to get to it, it's better to go this way, even though that may seem, like the physics may seem reverse, because, you know, like the logic is go towards the soul. Like soulness,
right?
You know, cool.
Yeah.
But I went the opposite way, and as I was going, I was thinking, who else in the world is doing this? And I thought, David Byrne. He got so white that he was cool.
Yeah.
And that's like the physics of that it's puzzling. So I had this idea of him as being super white, and I thought if I ever see him, I was a cab driver in New York City. I was a mentally ill cab driver in New York City. So that's something. And I thought if I ever see him, I'm just going to shout the word super white at him. Just shout it at him and see what he does. And I came up with this postulation in my mind, this plan of action. And a week later, driving the taxi, there he was. And as fate would have it, I cut my own hair. I'm always cut my own hair. And I had slipped with the trimmers and just gone straight down to skin right there. And then I had taken it down to skin there, and then it was lopsided, and I ended up having a mohawk. So I looked just like Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. And there's David Byrne. He's walking along, and I turn the cab around, and I get right behind him, and I roll down the window, and I stick my head out and go, ah, super white! And I expected him to turn around and say, yes! You know, or something like that, you know? And instead, he kind of clinched up and walked a little faster, and so I started shouting it at him, you know, super white, super white! And he was understandably terrified. Some like Travis Bickle character chasing him around. And so he ran into a store and hid. And I was so disappointed because I thought, leaps like this should take place in the world. One word should take you from nowhere to somewhere. And I was so disappointed, and yet 4 or 5 years later, through really strange twists and turns, he was holding my little cassette tape in his hand and saying, I want to sign this guy to a record deal. And the cassette tape was not a demo, it's been described as a demo. It was a document to record the songs that I wrote. I never expected anybody to hear it.
Right.
I was sitting in my kitchen beating on a pot to do the drums and singing through a Pepsi bottle to make what I thought sounded like what was on records, which was reverb. I didn't know. And I cut the Pepsi bottle in half, you know, like a 2-liter Pepsi bottle. And somehow or other, the shout that I made out to him super white, it took 5 years to get to him.
Yeah.
Which is really weird and mysterious and gives you like this feeling like that there is some order beneath the chaos of our design.
I kissed Kathy Lee Gifford, platonically, when she was 17 and her name was Kathy Lee Epstein. And she lived in Rehoboth Beach, and she used to sing at a Christian place there, sing Christian tunes. And I followed her career. I was really thrilled when she got on Name That Tune. You may not know that, but on Name That Tune, Kathy Lee Gifford was the girl who sang, "Da-da-da." I could name that tune in 3 tunes, and they'd go on, and a girl would go, "Da-da-da." That was Kathy Lee. And I'd think, damn, I kissed her. This is good living here. I never knew that she would end up being, like, important. Much like me.
When you're a solo artist, like I am, you have to kind of find a way within your limited constraints to get a cohesive sound. So I will draft whole bands and say, you know, go to a whole band and say, hey, can we do a song or two? Like what we did with Tucker Martine and Laura Beers and Steve Moore. And if my label's interested in me using somebody, I'll talk to them. If a friend is passing through town, like on Drill a Hole, Matt Ward was passing through town. He called me on the phone and I said, oh, come on over and play guitar. And he played guitar. And so it's like there are practical decisions and there are aesthetic decisions and there are friendship decisions, and you just kind of try and include them all. I don't think ever, oh, I'm making a fussy album. I don't want this nice, easygoing person on it. I think kind of like the more the merrier.
And a lot of it just seems to me not to necessarily lie within, I mean, there's some very surprising decisions, I thought, in some of your records, like Drill a Hole. You've got people from Amoeba and people from
Bare Naked Ladies.
Bare Naked Ladies.
I was excoriated in the press for that.
Yeah.
And you know what? If, say for example, the Bare Naked Ladies had never been famous and they had just been a bunch of nice musicians who had joined me on that song, nobody would have complained.
Or if you had listed them by names rather than...
Yes.
Nobody wouldn't...
Yeah, there's this whole political correctness when it comes to like fringe artists, you know, sullying themselves with mainstream artists, and I think it's just a bunch of nonsense. Good musicians are good musicians.
Yeah.
And they were incredibly kind. They actually paid for the track. I told them, they contacted me at a couple of shows and always said they were fans and they loved the music, and I called them and asked them if they wanted to do something, and they said sure. And then when it came time to do it, we didn't have the money for it, and they said, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Wow. And they flew me up there, and the last day before they had to go into the studio themselves, they spent it helping me out. And that's kind of been the story of my musical career, whether it's the Bare Naked Ladies or Joe Henry or Amoeba or, you know, all of the, like there's been Amy Mann coming in and singing a song. It's just been really kind, wonderful people just diving in out of nowhere and saying, let me help.
This is Pat playing guitar over here. Fiona over here.
Fiona is in the band Olabelle. She's sort of one of the linchpins of the band. Sings great harmonies, plays any instrument you put in her hands, is a very, very capable musician. And Pat plays guitar in a band called Goat in Athens. Great sort of a Tom Waits Southern blues rock band. And he plays on 4 or 5 songs on the album. It has a really unique guitar style. I don't think I've ever heard anybody play like him. I am not much of a musician. And I'll never be much of a musician because I have some sort of function in my brain that makes me kind of forget where my last foot landed. At one point, I had worked myself up to where I was writing classical etudes that were really complicated somewhere in the 80s. And I was a good musician, I guess. I didn't really know what I was writing, but I knew that I could create really complicated, beautiful, I thought, pieces. At this point, when I go out to do an album, if there's 10 songs on there, it takes me like weeks to figure out, how did I play that song? I have no idea. What chord is that? You know, I can take it to Pat and he can, like, in 8 minutes, he can figure out the song. And it takes me like 2 weeks. I did an album with Johnny Dowd and under the band name Hellwood. And there was one song that I wrote the music to, and it took me a month just trying to figure out what it was.
Show somebody else how to play it.
Yeah, it was embarrassing. Yeah. So I'm not much of a musician in regards to, you know, a traditional notion of a musician as a learned person who understands chord patterns and structures. But I have a certain sort of like excitability in my mind, which sneaks into the music, which doesn't really fit in the straight and narrow of music. You know, like I'm sitting there doing a vocal part and there's a lug wrench next to me, and all of a sudden I've got the lug wrench up and I'm doing something that I didn't anticipate to do, and it becomes an organizing principle for the song. Like on this album, Counting Numbers in the Air, I remember I had some strange little moment like that where, I know what it was, I got a bunch of different old auto harps that I pulled the mechanisms off of, and I beat on them, and I was just beating on one in between vocal passes, you know, like I was waiting for the vocals to cue up, because I sing my vocals over and over again. I have a Pro Tools studio at home in my garage, basically. And I was just hitting this thing and thinking about like Indian music and santors. I don't know if you know what a santor is, but it's a beautiful hammer dulcimer. And thinking about that and thinking, well, you know, I could do something like that. And all of a sudden, even though I've never played the santor, or even though I've never, all of a sudden it was just sort of there, an organizing principle for the song. So if I have good qualities, it's that things come flying into my mind that they don't come from, you know, like a logical.
Like thinking, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, it's not deliberate, it's kind of accidental. And
you gather chance pretty well.
I gather chance well, thank you. All right, you want to sit over here? You're smarter than me. I gather chance well. That's a really beautiful remark.
You have every right to boo. I wish more people would boo. I know there were individualists in the crowd. We're going to play a loud song, Kim. We have a new album out, or I have a new album out, and they're joining me here. It's called Transnormal Skipperoo, and this is what they call a single off the album, which is cool, man. Like, it's my single.
There's a track, always kind of one on your records that sounds to me like you're channeling David Byrne.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I wrote Blindly We Go, I thought I should send that off to David Byrne, because I think that he would do justice to that.
It's got a very Byrnean like meter or something.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
The truth of it is, even before I had stalked him and done the cab thing, I used to write songs, and I wrote a song that I thought, oh, David Byrne should sing this song. The lyrics are, I've got a Chinese wife, she's got jet black hair and slanty eyes, but she eats cornflakes, so her name is Alice. And she's got this American dog, she babies it with TLC, but she's mean to me, and boy, that makes me jealous. Isn't it strange how people can change? Affections may come, but when they go, we speak seriously. And I just thought, oh, David Byrne could sing that song. It's sort of like this disjunctive thing, and that was long, long, long before I ever stalked him or later was on his label. So there is, I think that he is sort of an exemplar of sort of an alienated white male who has found a way to make the alienation work. And there are times when I find a way to make my alienation work, and it's probably in songs like that. It's like some sort of mathematical crossroad. I don't know if that makes sense. we have found a strain of commonality.
Right.
You know, he obviously paved the way, and I'm following, because you know he allowed uptight white guys to find a path towards some sort of place in the rhythmic world.
Yeah.
He really did.
That's very well put.
Yeah, and that's you know, much the same way that Beck enabled a whole culture of people who were marginalized to suddenly become cool. I mean, that's really amazing. So both of them had a huge impact on not just music, but culture.
Are you a big listener? Seems
Nope.
like you know a lot I
Nope.
Is it just stuff that falls in your lap and you...
If it falls in my lap, I listen. Or so, I have a lot of friends who really care about me, and sometimes they give me music. I think they're trying to say, go in this direction, not necessarily musically, but just listen to this. It's important. When I was a cab driver, I was getting all the time. I was being given music by other cab drivers from other cultures. You know, like Arabs and Polish guys and Koreans, and I was friends with all these guys. I knew one of the guys. I wasn't friends with him, but I knew one of the guys that bombed the World Trade Center the first time. It was like I knew all these really interesting people in New York City in the 80s, and a lot of them would find out that I was a filmmaker at the time, and they would say, "Oh, well, you have to see this film from this country or listen to this music," and they would give me really beautiful music. Like that's where I first heard the Sand Tour, and that's where I first heard about King Sunny Ade and Fela Kuti and the Bundu Boys and people like that. So I have heard a lot of music, but I don't really seek it out. It sort of finds me.
I think that's a good stopping point.
Okay, that was impressive. I never know when to stop, as you can see.
Yeah, that was good.
Great.